saving the best for last. Dr. Sandra Carrillo from Panama is the co-founder of Medicana, a global medical consultancy, and is the first clinical professor of medical cannabis medicine at the University of Panama. Dr. Carrillo.
Thank you very much for all of you that stayed until the last minute. I know it's been a long day. I really appreciate that you stayed. I want to say thank you to Laura, to Fernando, and to all the organizers for inviting me to this wonderful event. Very high quality of speakers. I'm very happy to please here in Portugal. Today, I'm going to talk about cannabinoids in epilepsy. This is a subject that I think was the subject basically started the wave of cannabis in the world, at least in the country that I live in Latin America, and some countries in Europe, and even in the States. All this subject of medical cannabis started because children in different countries suffering from epilepsy, usually refractory epilepsy, couldn't find anything who can help them. These were children that they were on 3, 4, 5 medications or with rare genetic conditions that the polypharmacia that the neurologists were providing weren't enough. So it's very important to be able to assess what is happening with medical cannabis in epilepsy. We have learning objectives. First, we're going to review the preclinical data suggesting the therapeutic potential of cannabinoids in the treatment of epilepsy. Also, I want to review the clinical data of the cannabinoids and epilepsy, and also understanding the discussion of the benefits and adverse effects of cannabinoids in epilepsy. As we all know, and we've been talking the whole day, cannabidiol is the second most prevalent phytocannabinoid after the THC. It's the non-psychotropic cannabinoid, and is very attractive right now for the treatment of many ailments because it has a very broad potential medical use, and it has a lack of significant side effects. It's actually one of the most reliable anticonvulsivant effects that has been tested so far, and it has a poor affinity to the CB1 receptor in contrast to the THC. We see here the expression of the receptor CB1 was increased very, very highly on the regions of the epileptic hippocampus, demonstrating the role of the endocannabinoid system in regulating seizures activities. The extended neuronal depolarization on an epileptiform discharge may cause a switch from suppression of GABA release to suppression of glutamate release. We see here, start seeing how is the mechanism of the cannabis working in epilepsy. We have a study. This is a study in vitro models where what they were doing, they were using a special slice of the lobes showing epileptiform discharges. And in these different subjects that we see here, they were applying on cannabimimetic that they will call the Win55. It's a CB1 receptor agonist, and it was showing anticonvulsant effects against acquired epilepsy and also against the status epileptic, and also in primary low magnesium hippocampal neuronal cultures. So this is preclinical data demonstrated definitely there is an action of these cannabimimetics in the reduction of the seizures, status epilepticus, and acquired epilepsy. We have more data here showing that the endocannabinoids 2-AG and anandamide, in a dose-dependent manner are effective inhibitors of the refractory epilepsy in low magnesium hippocampal neuronal cultural model. The endocannabinoids anti-status epileptic effect were mediated via CB1 receptor, since they were blocked by receptor antagonist AM251. We have all the preclinical data and another study that we use in pilocarpine to induce seizures on the rat models, and they were demonstrating that when they use the CBD, the treatment of the epilepsy and the seizures improved. So we have that cannabidiol displays anti-epileptiforming and anti-seizures property in vivo and in vitro. We know, as Dr. Guzman was talking earlier, that it has a neuroprotective effect. We have in one of the studies, just in this study, it was shown that just 2 patients shown focal epilepsy following the cessation of the treatment with cannabis. This is like an isolated study, but it wasn't that significant. It was very important, a review that it was done about the use of cannabis for the treatment of epilepsy in the United States, where the patients are using artisan preparations. We see a lot that in different states of the United States, they use their own preparations, since the availability is not too broad. So what they see in this study is that definitely the patients, they were using the cannabis, specifically cannabidiol preparations. They were obtaining very important results in the reduction of seizures, and the amount of side effects that they experienced, these patients were about like 8% to 16%, but these side effects usually were more somnolence, diarrhea, anorexia, but definitely we keep seeing the value of the cannabis in epilepsy. We have EPIDOLEX. This is a very famous study. They have preclinical data, again, in vitro. They show the effect of CBD on epileptiform local field potentials induced in rat hippocampal brain slices. They used 5 animal models. They did maximal electroshock, audiogenic seizures for inducing the epilepsy, and even they used pilocarpine and penicillin. They showed that the use of the CBD reduced the seizures and showed they was well tolerated and did not produce motor deficits or neurotoxicity in the preclinical testing. The preclinical data with EPIDOLEX precisely, the results were the CBD significantly attenuated the status epilepticus and showed reduced of the seizures in all vivo models, and they showed there were no neurotoxicity or motor deficits. Again, we have more clinical data about EPIDOLEX. In the 2017, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, they made a review of 20,000 studies. Of those 20,000 studies, they choose the 10,000 that they saw that they have better clinical approach and better evidence, and they divided in different levels of evidence. This is very important because as a doctors and physicians, every time that we're talking to somebody that is not in pro of cannabis, or there is a government or other physicians, the first thing that they say is, I don't believe in cannabis because there is not enough evidence. And we know that we need more evidence, but we have a lot of evidence, and epilepsy is one of those subjects that are being widely studied Of course, we need studies with bigger samples of patients, and of course, we need to see long-term what's happening, but I think epilepsy is one of those ailments that is being is having a lot of attention. So in this report, they divided conclusive of substantial evidence of effect of the cannabis and chronic pain in adults, antiemetics in chemotherapy, pediatric treatment-resistant epilepsy, that is what we're talking, and spasticity in multiple sclerosis. They found moderate evidence of effect and improved sleeping outcomes like sleep apnea, chronic pain, and fibromyalgia. Limited evidence in anxiety, appetite, or weight gain in patients with AIDS, and PTSD and Tourette syndrome, and no evidence or effect in addiction, neurodegenerative disorders, irritable bowel syndrome, and cancer treatment. This is what they reported in 2017. I think in the last 2 years, this changed a little bit. It's been already released a little bit more studies in these other subjects, and we expect that in the next 2 to 5 years, we will have more evidence that it will be moving those ailments to the at least moderate evidence, but those ones that is like with no evidence are going to be going up. Talking specifically about the studies and the evidence of epilepsy, we have this study that was done by Neuber et al. In 2018. This was a study that it was made with 66 patients. The idea of this study was to see the tolerability and the safety of the treatment with cannabidiol in these patients. They started using 8 milligrams per kilogram, and definitely they saw an improvement. These patients, 21%, they were seizures-free, and 48%, they have an improvement on their seizures, more than 50%. We see in here the 22% show no improvement and worsening none. So this is a very important statistics because we definitely see how cannabidiol works in patients with epilepsy. This is another study that it was done last year at the Sick Children's Hospital with a very special preparation that it was 100 milligrams of CBD per milligrams per milliliter and THC 2 milligrams per milliliter. And this study, they had 60 patients. These patients were, the primary objective of the study was to check the decreasing of the number of convulsions and the seizures, and to check in the EEG what was the wave pattern that they have, and also they want to have a secondary objective to see how was improving the quality of life of the patients. In these cases, when we see patients with epilepsy, there are some things that are subjective, because you have a patient who has 400 seizures a day, and then you start giving the treatment with cannabidiol, and it's a patient that maybe will not end up with 0 seizures, but the fact that from 400 goes to 100 to 20 to 4, the impact in the life of that patient and even the impact in the family is very big. So there are like subjective measures that are very important to take in account. This study revealed that the treatment was very well tolerated. The main side effects that the patient reported, because we're talking in here a little bit amount of THC, was somnolence, anorexia, Some of them reported diarrhea, but in general terms was well tolerated. And the important thing is the very little amount of patients withdrawn the treatment. A lot of patients, 17% of the patients referred side effects, but just 8% withdrawn the treatment. So that tells you that they will really see the improvement. In conclusion, this treatment, this protocol was safe and well tolerated for the patients, and they were measuring, we were talking earlier about the impact of the CBD in the liver enzymes, and it was very important because most of these patients, they were on valproic acid or in clobazam. There's a lot of people that is very afraid of the clobazam when the patient is going to take cannabidiol. You have to be cautious, but usually, because what happens is the clobazam in combination with the cannabidiol increases his bioavailability. So what happens is that the patient start presenting more sedation. In these cases, what you have to do is just to measure the clobazam levels of the patient before to start the treatment, and then 1 month, and then 3 months, and then 6 months, because you have to keep doing the follow-up. And what you end up doing in these cases is to reduce the doses of clobazam so the patient can keep with the treatment. In the cases of the patients that are taking valproic acid, you see the increase of transaminase and some liver enzymes, but these usually, they were seeing that the elevation was transitory, like at the middle of the protocol, could start decreasing the elevation or stay the same, but that was, in a very little percentage, that was a reason why the patient got the suspension of the treatment. So we see in here also one of the main side effects that the patients reported, and the ones that most of the patients want to withdraw the treatment, was the somnolence. The patient was very sleepy, drowsy, and what they saw in this study is this: after the second or third week, the effect of the somnolence started wearing off. So that was very, very important and very interesting study. This is a very famous study. That is the study that it was with JW Pharma, cannabidiol for Dravet. So we see again in here, in this specific study, they were treating the patients on the dose. Important thing about the doses here. In this study, CBD they were doing the patients was between 6 and 18 milligrams per kilogram per day, and THC they were given starting from 0.04 to 0.32 milligrams per kilogram, and that was a dose that was safe and well tolerated. In this other study, that is the one, the EPIDOLEX, we see they were giving the patient 20 milligrams per kilogram per day. The results were very good. It was well tolerated, but at high doses, we see that elevation of transaminase of the liver enzymes are dose dependent. More CBD you give the patients, more elevation of the liver enzymes. In here, what they did is they did a continuation of the study, and it was a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled study. Again, treating the patients with cannabidiol and showing that the results were definitely very, very encouraging. More studies about EPIDOLEX and the evidence we have. Usually, the criteria for the treating a patient with cannabidiol, right now the accepted ones are refractory epilepsy that fits into the description that it has to be a patient who is under 3 or 4 medications that it hasn't been able to improve with that. When you treat a patient with, is already with this polypharmacy, the idea is not to remove the other medications. The idea is to start with cannabidiol, but you need to keep the other 3 or 4 medications. The main goal of treating a patient with epilepsy, refractory epilepsy, is not to remove the other medications, is to stabilize the patient. But in many cases, we've seen in studies that these patients from 3 to 5 medications, they start going to 3 to 2, and in some cases, the patient ends up just with the cannabidiol. But we have to be very responsible as doctors, and epilepsy, cannabidiol is not a first-line treatment. It's a treatment that has to be used when the patient is being already treating another medication and it hasn't worked. That's why we call it refractory epilepsy. We have the most important adverse effect that we've had in these studies occurring in more than 10% of the patients. And we have, as I said, somnolence, diarrhea, fatigue, decreased appetite, weight loss, convulsions, vomiting, transaminase elevation, rash, insomnia. And there was 12% of withdrawals of the treatments, but usually none of these patients had any serious side effects. It was just usually is the diarrhea that is very annoying for the mothers and for the patients, but it's very important when we're treating a patient with epilepsy to explain to the mother that the diarrhea is something that can happen just in case that is something that is unbearable for the patient. Shouldn't be something that disencourage the patient to do the treatment. Another thing with the diarrhea here is because one of these preparations that they were doing for these studies, they were doing it with olive oil, and the olive oil has the tendency to give more diarrhea to the patient. So what they did is they started to mixing it with coconut oil or other types of oil that they weren't that strong. The elevation of the transaminases, as I showed you before, occurs in 8% of the ones that are taking 10 milligrams of EPIDOLEX, 16 taking 20 milligrams versus the placebo. So we see that is dosage dependent. We see the pharmacology here of the EPIDOLEX. As we all know, the CBD, the action of the CBD has different paths than the THC. The CBD it doesn't work, it's not an agonist of receptor CB1, CB2. It works through another different types of mechanism. It's being demonstrated that works with the 5-HT serotonin receptor, and this receptor is in charge of moderates anxiety, depression, fatigue. It produces relaxation, and also has another receptors like the GPR55 that is anti-neoplastic and anti-apoptotic, and also the TRVP, that is the vanilloid receptor, that it has the property of analgesic and anti-inflammatory. We have here the presentation of EPIDOLEX. This is very important. I give credit to the JW Pharma because they were the ones who started doing first these studies. The only problem is the treatment with EPIDOLEX for a patient. The cost is $32,000 a year. So this is something that very, very little people can afford. So for us as doctors and the big companies and the industry, it's very important to focus our efforts and make these products available and affordable for the patients, because as we were talking earlier, this is beautiful, the science, the research, investigation, but if at the end all what we're doing cannot get into the patient's hands, it's not that easy, because this is an incredible medicine. Cannabidiol is a very novel product, but the prices are not too affordable. So we actually, we try to do like a campaign with the companies, with the industry, to try to reduce the prices, because if not, usually the worldwide population, the majority is poor people. So there is people that cannot afford $80, $70, $100 a day, a month for a treatment. So it's very important to create something that it has a good price, so it can be affordable for the patients. Another cannabinoid that is being studied and started being studied is cannabidivarine, the CBDV, and it's been showing some effects in epilepsy, but it's still ongoing studies in this matter of CBD. So I'm sure that in a few years we're going to have a lot of data released about all these other cannabinoids. This is a statement the American Epilepsy Society said about the position of medical cannabis, and I'm going to read it and quote it exactly the way they say it. The recent anecdotal reports of positive effect of cannabidiol for some individuals with treatment-resistant epilepsy give reason for hope. However, we must remember that these are only anecdotal reports, and robust scientific evidence for the use of cannabis is lacking. I just showed you like 5-7 studies, and most of them, they were double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled studies, which I consider they are a gold standard of the level of evidence. So this statement, they said that the robust scientific evidence, and more coming from the American Epilepsy Society. I mean, I think we have a lot of evidence in epilepsy. Of course, we need more studies, more robust. I agree with them, because we need more number of population, but we do have evidence. And says the lack of information does not mean that cannabis is ineffective for epilepsy. It merely means that we don't know if cannabis is safe and effective treatment for epilepsy, which is why we should be studying using the well-founded research methods that all other effective treatments for epilepsy have undergone. This is a challenge. I think it can be done, but as my colleague was saying before, we know it works, we know it's there. As physicians, we have the responsibility to know how it works. I have a lot of colleagues that come to me and say, you know, I don't know anything about cannabis, and I don't believe in cannabis. The first thing that I say, you don't believe in cannabis, but you say you don't know anything. So first, as doctors, we have the obligation of study and to learn, because with medical cannabis is something very strange that is happening usually in medicine. The doctor goes to the patient and tells, you have to take this medication, and you take it like this and like that. With medical cannabis, what I see is the patients are coming to the doctors asking if they can take medical cannabis. So it's our responsibility, no matter if we are a cardiologist, oncologist, or if we believe or not, to educate ourselves, because the patients are looking for the opinion of the doctor, and we have to be able to give an opinion. But the opinion is not telling the patient, I don't believe in that, that doesn't work. Just be able to give a good answer to the patient, because if you don't satisfy if you don't give a satisfactory answer to the patient will go and keep using it in a way that is not a good way, and it will harm himself, and then it will create a bad reputation of a treatment that is a good treatment, but if it's not prescribed in a proper manner by the doctor, it's not going to be working for anybody. So I do think that we have that responsibility to educate other doctors, to educate healthcare practitioners, to educate the families. Medical cannabis, I've seen that with patients that are using cannabis, you as a doctor need to develop a very close relationship, because this is a subject that the patients are apprehensive, they're scared, they don't know what to do, they have the neighbor telling them, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. So it's a lot of gossip. And the only person that the patient trust is what the doctor says. So we have to be prepared to support the patient, but support them to telling them the truth, and remove all the myths of saying the cannabis is good for everything, because we are destroying with that the reputation of a treatment that really works. So as we were saying earlier, education is the key. We all need to be educated, because this is for the better of the patient, because as we had our Hippocratic oath, do not harm. So we need to study how is that the endocannabinoid system works, and be able to assess the situations to see if the patient could benefit from these treatments. Conclusions, CBD improves seizure control in vitro, as we saw evidence, in multiple chemical-induced and genetic mouse in vivo in epilepsy. And CBD exhibits a promising safety profile. Controlled human trials are still required to better confirm the anti-epileptic properties of cannabis, but definitely we have a big responsibility here. We are in face of a very big paradigm, because cannabis is an ancient plant, and we are rediscovering all the properties that it has, but it's up to us to be responsible in the way we prescribe, in the way we talk about cannabis, because it's up to us to be able to give the patient the security and tell them how is the safest way to do it. If we don't know that it works for something, we just be with the patient honest and say, you know, I don't know, but let's use, as doctors, the network with other doctors, because with medical cannabis we have a lot of doctors that they are specialized in very specific things. So I do think that it's very important to have this network of support, so we can be able to refer the patient to other doctor. No matter there is in another country, what I've seen in this is that doctors from all over the world are willing to help each other, since this is something new. So it's very important to have the support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have one question. We have so far one question on the app. So the question is, some treatments mentioned today were based on milligrams or kilograms of the patient. Others were based on milligrams or milliliters of the tinctures. Which approach do you recommend for parents treating children with epilepsy?
Well, this is like, as we were saying, with cannabis, the important thing is to start slow and go slow. Definitely with children, you start with milligrams per kilogram per day. That is the way you start, and you start with the minimum. Always, because children are a population that they need to be more cautious. So definitely it will be milligrams per milliliter. So that the way you prescribe to a patient.
Okay, we didn't have. There's another question right over here, if there's a microphone.
When you change from one cannabidiol oil from another, you start by low dose, or you continue on the same dose?
Depending, because every single product, right now the problem is that we don't have standardized products. So it's so many products out there, and there is so many products claiming to have something they don't have. That is so important for the governments, the regulations. I've heard here in Portugal there's still not like a standardized product that the patient can buy. So it's a very personalized the way the doctor doctor decided to do, because when a patient comes to me and say, oh, I ran out of this brand, but then I have this one, it's tough, because I check the jar, I check the compounds, I read, but sometimes the controls on the manufacturer are not appropriate. So, and I found that those jars, they said CBD, THC, and then you go and analyze them and it don't even have CBD, THC, they have partly, they have something else. So it's very hard, the changes of brands, because so far right now we don't have standardized product. That's what is so important, that the governments standardize, because you can have a setback of a patient that you're giving him one and you change to the other one with the same doses, the same milligrams, but it's not. The only reason in here is that the product didn't have the amount of CBD or THC or the compounds that they said they have, because if we were having standardized, it should be to move from one to another one with the same doses. It shouldn't be the idea that you have to lower the doses or nothing if you're going to the same milligrams per kilogram and the same concentrations.
Thank you. There's one more. I guess there's time just for one more.
Olá, vou falar em português. Sei que é brasileira. O meu filho tem um síndrome raríssimo. Está nomeado como FOXG1. Eu não sei se conhece.
Because you believe she understands, but that's not exactly. No, not Brazilian.
Oh,
You're not
sorry.
Brazilian, right?
Okay. I could talk in English if you wanted. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
My son have a really rare syndrome, and it's called FOXG1 syndrome. I don't know if you know it, but the foundation research was created in America, and exists some people. It's a lot of people on that side of the ocean. And my question to you is, you know something about it, because the epilepsy is something that is really connected with this syndrome. Exists a lot of variants, but most of the kids have it. Hopefully my son not, but most have.
Yeah, well, actually, one of the first things in patients with epilepsy, there is just they call it epilepsy or refractory epilepsy, but there is a lot of underdiagnosed, because all these kids, they need genetic testing, because it's different when you have Dravet, Lennox-Gastaut, West syndrome. So it's very important to be able to diagnose the genetic situation of the patients in order to be able to treat. But we are really behind of putting together all those different genetic variations for these patients.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.